The ACNA is the Anglican Church in North America. They're the conservative evangelical split off from the Episcopal Church in America, which went left in the exact same way as the United Methodist Church, only 10, 15 years before. And the ACNA has been flourishing, has been doing quite well. They've got a new guy in charge. This is a profile on him. The reason I care about this is the Global Methodist Church and the ACNA obviously are kind of kindred spirits, came out of the same thing or trying to reclaim something good. John Wesley was an Anglican, by the way. Early American Methodist practice was very much rooted in the Anglican tradition, even though we went off in some other directions. There's a lot of my audience that is not at all in favor of going back to Anglican roots. I'm one of the few people, well, I don't think there's few. I'm one of the people that really thinks that the Anglican tradition has a lot to offer. My wife and I, in our private devotional life, have used the Book of Common Prayer for many years. We're getting further in that direction. We're learning how to do Gregorian chant. We're hopefully going to learn plain song after that. There are many rich traditions in the Anglican history that have been left behind that could be reclaimed for our good. And I don't agree that it would exclude the charismatic witness. I think that both can be held in tension, or not even in tension. I think they can be held together. I don't think they're at odds. So this is a profile on their leader, and I think I'd just like to do my small part to get the Global Methodist praying for the ACNA, and the ACNA praying for us. And I'm aware that the GMC, my tribe, and the ACNA have already been talking about ways in which they can collaboratively work together for God's glory. So I don't know that would ever mean that both groups combine, but there's definitely talk of an ecumenical relationship for God's glory, which would be fantastic. So with that in mind, let's learn a little bit. It's Archbishop Steve Wood. The title here is Where the ACNA Has Been and Where It's Headed. A conversation with Archbishop Steve Wood. Before he was elected as the third Archbishop of the ACNA, Steve Wood was one of the earliest COVID-19 patients in the United States, placed on a ventilator for 10 days in March of 2020. 2 years earlier, as Bishop of the Carolinas and Rector of St. Andrew's Church in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, Wood watched as his church building was engulfed in a fire. Quote, "I wouldn't trade any of those experiences for where I am right now because God has been so extraordinarily gracious to me through every one of them," said Wood. In adversity, he said, he's learned to trust God's faithfulness. And while he readily admits the denomination isn't perfect, he sees the Anglican Church in North America, which formed in 2009 after splitting from the Episcopal Church, as the Anglican Church of Canada and the Anglican Church of Canada as another testament to the graciousness of God. During his term as Archbishop, he hopes that message will be not only reinforced in the pews, but shared widely throughout the continent. On the heels of denominational dust-ups over women's ordination to the priesthood and accountability for the misconduct of clergy, in particular bishops, Wood is beginning his 5-year term as Archbishop, focusing on transparency and compassion as the young denomination continues to mature. A week ahead of his investiture or formal installation in South Carolina on October 30th, Wood spoke to RNS about the ACNA, where it has been and where it's headed. The interview has been edited for length and clarity. So you'll notice one of the things about the Anglican Church in North America, they're an Episcopal structure, which means they have bishops, and they even have archbishops. So in the GMC, in no Methodist body I'm aware of do they have archbishops, but arch just means higher up. You have archangels, ARCH, in Greek just means higher ranking. So archangels, archbishops, they're not going to have a pope, which the Latin roots of pope just mean father, daddy, so father of the church. But archbishop just means there's several bishops, and he's at the top. And you'll see that there's already, a lot of overlap. They have the same areas of contention. I think we don't argue about women's ordination to priesthood or elderhood as much as them, but there are still Methodists who do. And then misconduct of clergy and bishops was quite an issue in the UMC and is still a concern. It's a concern of mine, by the way. So here's the first question they asked him. As you step into this role, is there a word or theme you hope will guide your work as Archbishop? And he said, the ACNA determined some years ago that its principal vision was to reach North America with the transforming love of Jesus Christ. 130 million people in North America don't know Jesus. And that is the compelling motivation in ministry for me, to hold forth the good news of Christ to the continent. I also want to tell good stories. Our Matthew 25 initiative is extraordinary. They're ministering to people on the margins of society. The work we're doing with church planting is spectacular, but it's not being talked about. So for those of us who have a passion for reaching the lost, for aiding the poor, that's a common interest with the ACNA. One might have a stereotype in their head of Anglicans as just doing their little liturgy and not being concerned about the world. The ACNA is very concerned. The author asked him, what's her name, by the way? I didn't acknowledge her. Catherine Post, and this is for Religion News Service, so this is reposted here. She asked, when you look back at the past 15 years, what are some of the things you think the ACNA has done well as a denomination? He says, I find enormous satisfaction looking back over the last 20 years and saying the Lord established us, preserved us, and he's growing us. If you haven't seen it, I interviewed David Roseberry, who was once upon a time the priest of the largest Episcopal church in North America, in our country. And he and his church left the Episcopal Church, and I think they're in the ACNA now. I actually don't remember. I shouldn't speak out of turn. But if you're curious to hear one man's story from his perspective of what happened 20 years ago, and for several years, then just Google on YouTube, search David Roseberry, Plain Spoken. That's extraordinary, coming out of a meltdown of the Anglican world in North America. We're not perfect by a long shot, but at one level, 20 years into this process, we've made it. The other thing the ACNA has done well is brought people together across the spectrum of Anglicanism. You'll have low church Protestants, high church Anglo-Catholics, people in the middle, and the ACNA has really created a place where all these folks find a home. I think the other thing is, a number of church plants that started, they went into a community with a vision to make a long-term commitment to live there and become incarnate in that. And for me, that's just classic Anglicanism. So if you didn't know it, it's a global faith. It's to be found around the world, not just Great Britain, America, but it's growing leaps and bounds in Africa. I'm pretty sure it's in Asia. I don't know as much about that, but he's speaking truth here. All right, the next question was, in the run-up to the June Assembly, near 300 ACNA clergy. I was going to talk about, within the ACNA, what he just highlighted was they're kind of a big tent. I mean, big tent should give us PTSD because that's what they said in the UMC all the time. And all that meant was they commingled light and darkness, the good and evil all together in a meaningless covenant. What he's talking about here, though, is different cultural traditions in the same theological convictions. So they definitely do have high church Anglo-Catholics, what we would caricature as Anglicans, crypto-Catholics. They definitely have some of those, or a lot of those. But they also have low church Protestantism. They have a wide variety of expressions within the ACNA, as you would also find in the Global Methodist Church. In the run-up to the June Assembly, nearly 300 ACNA clergy and a diocese voiced opposition to women's ordination and said disagreements on the subject imperiled the denomination. Do you believe ACNA's approach to women's ordination is still up for debate? During your term as Archbishop, do you foresee any changes to ACNA's strategy of allowing dioceses to individually decide how they approach women's ordination? And he says, probably no, as to how we're structured. In the Constitution and the canons, this is our governance structure, and the dioceses have authority to make those decisions. And so, short term, it's not practical to think that the constitutions and canons are going to be changed anytime soon. That being the case, the question for me then becomes, how do we live together? And I prefer a more irenic, that means peaceable, compassionate voice. I'm big on having conversations. I encourage others to listen, not to defend a position, but to hear where the other person's coming from. Do I think it's a threat to the ACNA? No, but I do think it's going to be an ongoing conversation point. And I think how we have the conversation is critical. And I think, if you want to read the rest of the interview, I've got the link to it on the show notes. But I think that's a good note to end on because I'm 100% in agreement. How we have a conversation matters. I think we have to have a conversation, and then we have to have it well. There is no refusal to have the conversation and avoidance or denial. That's not good. And then being petty or vindictive or immature, that's not an option either. We have to be adults about the hard conversations before us. And the women's ordination thing seems like a foregone conclusion in the GMC, but there are plenty of other issues, say the issue of infant baptism, that doesn't seem as foregone a conclusion. And there are a lot of places in the world that would like to join the GMC if the GMC could budge on infant baptism. I'm kind of personally of the mind that we shouldn't, that's a foundational doctrinal principle that shouldn't be questioned. But even so, if my reaction to people bring it up is so defensive and hostile that it just poisons the waters, then the GMC is going to not do very well. So the Archbishop here is saying we can have this conversation and it doesn't have to do us in, but I'm going to insist that we have the conversation well. And that's what any good leader would do. So Lord, bless the ACNA, bless the new Archbishop, and help them to have good, holy, mature conversations. And if it be your will, then we ask that you would help us to come together with them in the light of the love of your Son, Jesus. We ask these things in his holy name. Amen.